As much as I talk about psychedelics, I sometimes forget that there was something that came much, much before them. In fact, there was another drug. Something I experimented with much, much earlier. A drug that totally changed who I was as a person and opened me up to being the easygoing and happy man that I am today. This drug is called MDMA. I feel so good. Yep, that about explains it. But let's talk about where it came from. Until the early 2000s, the most well-known origin of ecstasy is that it was created by a company called Merck as a lucrative way to suppress the appetites of soldiers in the German army. Merck, the story went, was then forced to withdraw the compound and scrapped it, where it stood for years until resurrected by the 1970s drug guru, Alexander Shulgin. But that wasn't the true story. Not completely, anyway. Merck decided to set the record straight in something unusual for a large company to do. They got experts from its corporate history department and a local doctor to look through thousands of original documents in its archive at its headquarters. For more than a year, they searched for references to ecstasy in laboratory journals, annual reports, patents, letters, interview records, memoirs, and anything they could find from the last 6 decades of scientific research dating from 1900 to 1960. What did they find? The company did develop the drug in 1912, but the appetite-suppressant story is an urban myth, passed on from source to source. Instead, the man who first synthesized MDMA was the chemist Dr. Anton Kulisch. He created MDMA as a byproduct while trying to synthesize hydrastinine, which is basically a substance that's supposed to stop bleeding when applied to a wound, like a blood clot. Hydrastinine was patented by Merck's local rival Bayer, so they were trying to make their own version, and ended up synthesizing what was then called patent 274350. Now known as MDMA. What happened next? The Merck archive reveals that the company revived its interest in ecstasy in 1927, when the first tests were carried out on animals. The details have been lost, but it seems that a chemist called Max Oberlin had stumbled on the original patent and thought MDMA might mimic adrenaline because it had a similar structure. Oberlin described the results of his tests as partly remarkable, but the research stopped because of steep rises in the price of chemicals needed to make the drug. Further Merck tests in 1952 showed that the compound was toxic to flies. More controversial is the first testing on humans. The U.S. Air Force is known to have carried out secret tests of MDMA and other drugs in the early 1950s. The experiments are often described as a search for a truth serum, but were carried out on animals, and it is more likely the military was searching for new chemical weapons. The Merck archive suggests one of its scientists may have administered the first human tests in 1959. Wolfgang Fröstorfer, a company chemist, was interested in the production of new stimulants, and the report found insinuations that he had cooperated with an institution for aviation medicine and tested it on humans. But it says, despite all efforts, it remains unclear. By now, others had heard about this compound and ran with it. A year later, in 1960, the first official recipe for MDMA appeared in a scientific journal. And by 1970, it was popping up in tabs seized in Chicago. It was everywhere. MDMA was on the rise. And it wasn't until 15 years after that MDMA became illegal. So, for 15 years in America, you could legally roll balls. Hold on. Let's go back. Yes, in the early 1970s, MDMA was being experimented with by chemists and doctors, but it still wasn't a large, well-known drug, much like LSD and psilocybin were at the time. A man named Alexander Shulgin was one of the chemists to really find a home in MDMA. He played a huge role in the explosion of its use throughout America. In 1976, Shulgin was introduced to MDMA by a student in the medicinal chemistry group he advised at San Francisco State University. He introduced the chemical to Leo Zeff, a psychologist from Oakland, California. Zeff used the substance in his practice in small doses as an aid to talk therapy. Zeff introduced this substance to hundreds of psychologists and therapists around the nation. From there, the drug took off and eventually was given the street name Ecstasy. Making the drug illegal in 1985 really did nothing but spark more curiosity in the world. By the mid to late 80s, raves became more popular and Ecstasy was the main drive behind the scene. With the electronic music having a large explosion in the 90s and now again in recent years, it's hard to see this drug slowing down anytime soon. In my opinion, and I truly hope that MDMA can and will be researched much more and used in therapeutic ways. Even though it's been given a really bad reputation over the past several decades, I really do believe it can help, and I'm not alone in thinking this. For a second, I thought I was, though. It was kind of weird. When I looked it up on Wikipedia, it showed it had no medical uses at all. Then I looked a little further and saw it had been used in countless ways, from helping with PTSD to being used in small doses with therapy. It was everywhere. I read how participants given MDMA are more likely to use words relating to friendship, support, and intimacy in therapy, and how the drug exerts its effects through dopamine receptors while also producing oxytocin release, which basically just improves bonding and raises levels of empathy, which is great for therapy, obviously. I mean, think of it this way. Yeah, you can think of MDMA as buying a purple Pokeball quad stack from the dude with a bandana on his face at the back of the base pod, or you can see it as a tasteless compound in your tea at the beginning of a night in with your wife, who you've been having problems with. Or you can see it as a small gel tab that a person with severe post-traumatic stress issues takes as he discusses things with his doctor. Something that helps him open himself up in ways he couldn't before. I read that MDMA can help with memories as well, because we associate certain memories with certain feelings, and through the proper therapy with MDMA, you can change those feelings. There are many different ways of looking at MDMA. It just really takes an open mind. There are a lot of people in this world with a lot of problems, and I think it's time to start looking for better solutions. I mean, it worked for me.
Road, right? Just go on that road again.
What's up, YouTube world? Audible 44, aka Life 4 Dub 84 here.
Hey, turn off
Tokyo Drift in the back.
Homie right here.
Hey,
Don't know shit, dog.
all right, so I just got back from, what is it called?
We ain't even got
Juju
back
Beach.
yet.
Oh, well, it's over.
got back
We're on our way home.
Hey, is it this way?
Juju
It's 5 in the morning,
motherfucker. This your boy Shadow.
Yeah.
Hey, we just got Juju beat the fuck out, nigga. Juju beat on now, motherfucker.
Hey, where's the exit?
And as you guys can tell, it was
Right.
a fucking
I mean, left.
beautiful,
Left.
amazing,
Left.
victorious night. We came twice, saw, and we conquered.
And we are not fucking sleeping. Actually, I think all of us sleep.
That was hard for me to watch. It's really hard to say that acting like that ended up positive for me, but somehow it did. Let me put things into a little bit better of a perspective for you. From elementary to high school, I was the weird guy who always stood to himself. I didn't eat with people at lunch, and I really had no interest in making friends. All I wanted to do was be on the computer and listen to music. I never smoked weed or drank alcohol. I was totally against it, honestly. It wasn't until I was almost 17 that I smoked weed for the first time, and I loved it. I'm a huge marijuana advocate, and I really don't believe in the gateway drug theory as they explain it, but for me, it kind of was. Smoking weed gave me confidence to experiment with other drugs, and I really don't regret it. Though I did have multiple experiences that were not the most responsible. They were actually just fucking stupid. From taking pills from strangers at raves to partying all night and spending all my money on ecstasy instead of water, and I've done a lot of dumb shit. But when it really comes down to it, I wouldn't be who I am if not for MDMA. Even though people on ecstasy usually do look weird and act overly, maybe even artificially loving, it forces you to accept that love in the moment. MDMA shows us what life really could be like if we as humans could live in pure joy and bliss. I like to think of it as MDMA opened me up to receiving and accepting love from others, and psychedelics opened me up to receiving and accepting love from myself. But if not for MDMA initially changing me as a person, I could still be that guy with the hood on, not talking to anyone and living the rest of my life alone. So, in conclusion, psychedelics are a huge part of who I am, but MDMA is a huge part of why I am, if that makes sense. It's definitely a very dangerous drug that is very commonly mixed with other drugs. It's very hard to get pure MDMA. It's something I would never recommend doing without proper knowledge and experience, but if used the right way, MDMA can be a life-changing experience. Smoke something, drink something, and I'll see you guys next week. Peace.